Alright. We good to go? G'day, hi everybody. G'day. Alright, morning, how are you? Alright, you're up for sound there. You want a little bit of sound check. Mark Bailey, Transport Minister, here with Chris Stream and Josh Cooney. Okay, excellent. All right. Look, great to be here for this media conference around road safety. With Christmas coming up, it's really important that people prioritise road safety every time they get behind the wheel, and in some cases make sure they don't get behind the wheel. Because what we want to see is a safe Christmas where everybody remembers Christmas and New Year for all the right reasons, not for tragic reasons. What we're seeing on the roads already is there's too much dangerous driving going on, that we're seeing fatalities that are a worry this year. We've got 275 fatalities so far this year. We're up 9 on where we were last year, and what we've seen is an uptick in terms of the number of fatalities since the middle of 2020 during the pandemic and its impacts. And one of the issues that we're very concerned about is the level of people drink driving in our community. We've seen the number of fatalities increase significantly as a result of that, including also hospitalisations. This year we saw 36 fatalities in the first 6 months of the year, which is up considerably, and we've seen 64 fatalities last year from drink driving, with 890 hospitalisations. So, look, you know, I can guarantee that of those fatalities, not a single one of those people thought that would be their last day alive. So what we've got to make sure is that safety is the #1 priority every time we drive. What we see is that roughly about 3/4 of fatalities on our roads are people making poor choices and paying a terrible, terrible price for it. So the simple solution here is to drive safely every single time you get behind the wheel. And if you're out drinking for Christmas and New Year's, have a great time, but have a plan B. Make sure you know how you're going to get home if you think you might be over the limit. Car, whether it's a designated driver in a car, taxi or a ride share, take public transport, whatever it is, have a plan B and make sure you can get home safely. Because what we see, RACQ will speak in a moment, but some of their research is a real concern. You know, 1 in 8 people out there have admitted to drink driving in the last 12 months, and that is totally dangerous and unacceptable. We've got to be thinking about the other people in our community. When we drive on our roads, it's not just about you as a driver, it's about your passengers, it's about other people using the roads, and that means not drink driving. That means not being distracted with your mobile phone, and that means wearing a seatbelt. Those simple things will save lives. So I also have a couple of comments here about the number of people caught using a mobile phone, being distracted, not looking at the road. We've seen nearly 120,000 Queenslanders caught doing that. And look, you've got to be prepared when you drive for any eventuality, and it is really disappointing to see the number of people out there still not getting the message that your eyes should be on the road, not on your mobile phone, and this is the time to correct that kind of dangerous behaviour. We also seen our new cameras pick up more than 50,000 people not wearing a seatbelt. Now, when a crash happens, the seatbelt will save your life. It'll save the life of your passengers. The car shouldn't start until the seatbelt is done up. So let's get it right at Christmas this year. Let's have a record low year in terms of the road toll, and that means every single one of us driving safely, but also making sure our family and our friends are also driving safely. If we're getting in the car and we can see unsafe things happening like seatbelts not going on, we can all be part of this solution. So I urge people this Christmas, make road safety your #1 priority. Let's get the number of lives lost down. Let's have 0 this year. That would be a fantastic outcome, and it is achievable if we just make road safety our #1 priority. Chris, from Queensland Police, thanks.
I'd like to congratulate our partners at Transport and Main Roads on the launch of this campaign. As the Minister said, we're absolutely dedicated with our partners at Transport and Main Roads in sort of targeting drink driving across this Christmas period. So what you'll see is an increase in officers right across the state. So we'll be patrolling everywhere from beaches to our main roads to those tourist hotspots. We'll also be focusing around licensed premises and other safe night precincts and other areas like that. So those increased police will be looking at all of the fatal 5 figures, but in particular focusing on drink and drug driving as well as speeding around those areas. So as the Minister said, look, the only real acceptable lives lost figure is 0 for us, and we're absolutely committed in attempting to drive down that, but we can't do that without community contribution. So in regards to those events that are coming up, we know people are going to be attending Christmas functions, going to visit their family. You can help contribute. You can help intervene before a person goes onto the road and drink drives. So you can help those people that might not be in the best frame of mind. You can help them to make the right decision. So the message is simple. If you are planning to drink, do not drive. If you are planning to drive, do not drink. So we will be out there on the roads with those increased numbers, in the air, as I said, looking at beaches and right across the entire state. The Operation Charger campaign launches this Friday with those increased policing numbers on the road, and we will be doing everything we can to stop people making those fatal areas, because as the Minister mentioned before, there are lots of contributors. We look at those fatal 5, they are definitely overrepresented in the statistics around that. And again, as the Minister said, when you hop in your car, make those simple things. Put your phone away, don't be distracted by it, make sure you're putting that seatbelt on at that time. We have sufficient evidence to suggest that people still aren't doing that. As the Minister again mentioned, we get people that are being caught by the remote cameras, and even in fatal traffic accidents, we're seeing people ejected from vehicles and then suffering fatal injuries. So we can absolutely, with the community, contribute to reducing those lives lost tolls. And as I said, this is not some sort of insidious disease. The solutions are absolutely with us now. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. RACQ clearly supports this campaign. Road safety is in our blood, it's in our DNA. And yet, sadly, drink driving is still an issue in Queensland. Drink driving continues to be a scourge on our roads. As we mentioned before, it's one of the fatal 5 driving behaviours that causes death. And yet we know, RACQ knows from our own research, that too many Queenslanders still don't take this issue seriously. Our latest road safety survey found that around 13% of motorists admitted to driving while believing that they may have been over the limit. And 13%. So, look, that's the kind of complacency and lack of discipline that we need to stamp out if we are to have any chance of putting the brakes on this worsening road toll of ours. Also, around 10% of motorists still don't seem to know what actually sends you over the limit. Around 10% of motorists thought that you can have 2 standard drinks every hour after the first hour, which, as we all know, it's complete rubbish and is not reality. So, look, you know, RACQ supports the campaign. We commend the government on developing what we think is a creative campaign that could be very impactful. And the key message is, well, we're heading into the holiday season. Many of us are heading to work parties, backyard barbecues. If you're going to have a drink, that's fine. If you're going to let your hair down, that's fine. But plan ahead. Leave the car and find another way home. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh. Well said. Any questions in terms of the road safety campaign over Christmas, New Year?
Can you talk us through what else has gone into the campaign? We've got the signage behind you as well.
Yeah, look, this is an innovative campaign that really plays on the craft beer phenomena, which is really popular. People love their local beers, but what we do here is we show people at that point of sale what the consequences are of that one beer too many. You know, is it going to be whiplash? Is it going to be an interlock shame? It's designed to make people think about, is that extra beer really worth the sort of consequences that I might have to live with for the rest of my life? Because that is the reality. Your reactions are much slower when you're over the limit for things that might happen on the road, and we see the tragic outcomes of that all too often.
So where are we going to see these? Are these going to be at pubs, sort of thing?
Yeah, look, this will be an extensive campaign, so people will see this on their TV, they'll see it on social media, they'll see it on billboards. It's a very broad campaign so that you won't be able to miss it. And it's designed to show that bad choices can have tragic consequences and to make sure that people make the right choice when it comes to one beer too many.
Yesterday we saw a social media personality charged with dangerous driving driving over his use of a disused clown car. How reckless is this kind of behaviour on our roads?
Oh, look, this very irresponsible and dangerous driver called himself Silly Sid. And I say to everyone out there, don't be a silly Sid. That was ridiculous. It was showing disdain for everyone else on the road in a really obvious way. You know, when people drink drive, they're doing exactly the same thing as Silly Sid, but maybe not as obviously, but the danger is there. So don't be a silly Sid, be a safe driver. That's my message to people this Christmas.
Minister, the government's introduced a range of deterrence measures over the last couple of years, like interlocks for mid-range drink drivers, new speeding fines, new mobile phone fines, and yet the road toll's on track to be the worst in a decade. Why don't you think those deterrence measures are working?
Yeah, look, we saw the lowest ever number of deaths on our roads in 50 years since records began in 2019, and that trend continued until about the middle of 2020. Of course, 2020 was when the pandemic was hitting us all, and we saw that trend start to change significantly and has been quite constant since then. Although what we're starting to see, hopefully, are some green shoots in terms of some of the measures we've been taking having an impact. So we're starting to see the numbers, while they're still significant about people caught using their mobile phone and being distracted or not wearing a seatbelt, the numbers per capita are starting to decline. So people are starting to get the message, but I still think it's early days, and we've still got some time for people to realise that the risk of getting caught not wearing a seatbelt or driving distracted will be 100%. These units move around regularly. There's a lot of people out there with a pretty painful hit in the wallet and on their licence in terms of demerit points who understand that. That is having a ripple effect. But just like random breath testing, measures that we bring in for road safety don't have an overnight impact. It takes some time for it to go throughout the whole community and for behaviour to change. So, and of course, this year we saw 14 people die during the floods in March, people driving into floodwaters and paying a terrible price for that. So, I'm hopeful that we can see a much safer Christmas and New Year this year. If people can remember that message, make safety their first priority.
What about the pandemic has caused more fatalities on our roads?
Sorry, say that again, Jeff?
What elements of the pandemic have caused more fatalities on our roads?
Oh, well, look, there's no doubt, as I mentioned before, that the spike in drink driving fatalities is very clear. It's been up about 25%. So, there's more people drinking and driving at the same time and not separating the two. That is a clear trend that is contributing to the increase in the number of fatalities since the middle of 2020. And that's why we've targeted this campaign this Christmas and New Year and next Easter to make sure that message around drinking and driving, you've got to separate the two. You can't do both. You've got to separate them if you want to be a responsible member of our community.
Minister, is fatigue still one of the fatal five?
Yeah, look, absolutely. Fatigue is a big issue out there, and it's often the silent killer. So, if you're somebody who might be at risk of that, it is something to be taken equally as a threat to yourself and others, as drink driving, as speeding, as not wearing a seatbelt. So I urge people, every single time you drive, make sure that you're fit to drive, that you're driving safely. By doing that, you massively decrease the risk to you, to your passengers, to everybody on the roads. The sad truth is that the majority of our fatalities are people who have made often one or more risky choices at the same time and paid a terrible price.
So with that in mind, why are you closing driver reviver stations?
Well, driver reviver stations, of course, were a very popular thing 10, 20 years ago. What we've seen is a huge drop-off in the number of people who take advantage of those, in fact a drop-off of about 80%. So I think people are making different choices, whether they're buying their coffee somewhere, where it's tailor-made, or getting a bite to eat at commercial places. I think that's a pretty clear trend. And what we're seeing, though, is we're transitioning some of the driver revivers to local groups and councils. You'll still see the majority of driver reviver centres still there, and the ones that we're transferring, some of those will be picked up by local groups and by councils.
Just on another matter.
Sorry, is everyone done with the campaign?
I've got
One more?
another question for
let's do.
that's all right. We've seen a man blow 0.395 in air. That vision's been released as part of this campaign today. How does a person get to that level, and how concerning is it that someone would be on the road?
That's absolutely concerning, given the time of the day when you look at that driver in there when they were intercepted. So that's obviously consumption of excessive alcohol. Really irresponsible and really selfish, and that's part of the message today. Don't be absolutely selfish. Not only are you placing your own lives at risk, but it's clear through the research there's a really significant increased risk in terms of you actually harming other people on the road. So really, really irresponsible, and with that gentleman there, we'll be obviously following that through to court and seeking the maximum penalties applied to that gentleman.
And just quickly, what condition would you be in at that level?
Highly intoxicated, so almost, for most people, incapacitated. So your ability to think correctly, your ability to perceive distance, your ability to actually drive that motor vehicle. It was a large four-wheel drive, so absolutely capable of causing fatal injuries to other people. So your ability, and obviously the officers observed that and then intercepted that person. But we've also seen some other high-range drinking offences throughout Queensland, which again is absolutely irresponsible and really, really selfish in terms of those people there. Thank you.
All right. Is that on road safety? Okay, we'll go to other issues.
Okay, given the importance of the wetlands and the significant community pushback, how can the Toondah Harbour project be good for Queenslanders?
Look, I understand this is a matter that's being currently considered by the federal government. It'll need either approvals or disapprovals by the federal government, and I'm sure they're looking at it in close detail.
Just in light of that Auditor General's report that came out last week, why is Cross River Rail still good value for money if we're not going to meet those public transport patronage numbers?
Well, Jack, there's a thing called the global pandemic hit in the last 2 years, so that's certainly had an impact in terms of public transport patronage. But and look, people will come back to public transport. We're seeing that trend happen now, which is good to see. But work patterns have changed a little bit, which is something that was unpredicted at that time. So what we'll see is the population growth in southeast Queensland and Queensland continue with a lot of steam. And we need a strong public transport system to deal with population growth. That auditor report showed that the contingency as of June the 30th this year was still intact. It absolutely undermines the lines being run by the LNP. They can't even get their own lines right about what the size of the blowout is. When they invent figures, you'd think they'd be at least consistent in their invention of figures, but they can't even get that right. So we know this project was cut by the LNP when they were in power. They promised to cut it a second time when they're in opposition. It's only Labor that builds the public transport infrastructure that a growing state needs. We're the only major party you can rely on to do that. The LNP's record on Cross River Rail has been pathetic.
The key business case suggested there was a 103% increase in patronage numbers between 2015 and 2026 is needed in order to meet the business case that was put forward. Are we actually going to meet that target?
Well, look, we've got 4 years to go yet, and I think it would be a very brave business case person and reviewer who would have predicted a global pandemic back in 2015. No one was seeing this come around the corner. It's had a huge impact on every sector of the economy and every part of our community. So I think it's a pretty cheap line to suggest that we could foresee a global pandemic when we haven't had one in a century. I mean, this is a ridiculous line of attack from an LNP in Queensland who hate this project. They undermine this project at every single opportunity. When the public absolutely supports Cross River Rail, they see the need to have a stronger public transport system, a new underground line. It'll be transformational in terms of public transport use in southeast Queensland, essential to the Olympics. This is a project that would never have happened on the LNP. It is happening, 100% funded by the Palaszczuk government, because we can see the future and we're investing in the infrastructure we need for that future.
Just to be clear, do you think we are going... is it possible we'll fall short of that 103% target?
We'll have to see what the next 4 years portends. The last 2.5 years, no one could have predicted what happened in the last 2.5 years. I'm not going to be Nostradamus here. The need for this Cross River Rail project is absolute. Absolute. So, the LNP needs to get into the 21st century and start backing public transport infrastructure rather than undermining it, whether it's the light rail on the Gold Coast, Cross River Rail, Sunshine Rail, duplication, they always whinge and undermine public transport infrastructure. Under Labor, we'll deliver it.
The Lord Mayor's pushing to turn Pinkenba into crisis accommodation. Is that something the government's given thought to?
Well, look, I know the Lord Mayor's mentioned to this previously. This facility is a federal facility, so if he's got some ideas, he should probably contact the federal government and let them know. Certainly there's a lot of pressure in the housing market. I think everyone knows that. That's why we had a housing summit with a $21 million package that come out of that to add to the $3.9 billion the Palaszczuk government has got committed over the next 4 years to social and affordable housing. We've built nearly 4,000 public houses since we came to office, even with virtually no support from the previous coalition federal government, and we're planning another 5,600 social housing units till 2027. So we're very committed to helping people in this difficult time when the housing market is at such a squeeze.
But is that something you consider supporting to help the housing market?
Well, we've already brought out our measures to help the housing market, both out of the Housing Summit and also in the last two budgets. We announced a record level commitment to help people with affordable and social housing in the last two budgets. If the Lord Mayor wants to talk to the federal government, rather than doing a media event, he should talk to the federal government. This is a facility that only happened because the state government understood what the pandemic was about, and the federal government were shamed into actually acting very belatedly.
Is hospital funding the same as it was during the pandemic? And if not, have there been job cuts?
Well, let's be very clear. We've had record funding in health. The last budget, only less than 6 months ago, we announced 3 new hospitals. We saw 11 hospital expansions, and we fully funded that. In terms of the super profits happening, in the resources sector, fully funded investment in health. We restored the cuts to health that were made under the Newman LNP government by David Christopher and Campbell Newman. We saw 4,400 nurse positions disappear when the LNP were in power. They sacked 1,800 nurses. They picked fights with doctors. They cut the health budget to ribbons, and more cuts than a barber shop on health when Campbell Newman and David Christopher were in power. And so for them to be criticising our record investment in health is unbelievable, because health was in tatters last time they had the reins of power, and it's only this government that restored our health sector just in time before the pandemic that allowed us to cope with the pandemic so well.
So you haven't made cuts since the pandemic to hospital staff?
There has not been cuts in the health sector. There's simply an LNP lie.
You suggested a couple of months ago, and Cross River Rail did as well, that there was a cost analysis underway to look at market pressures. Has that analysis been done, and if so, what does it show?
Yeah, look, Cross River Rail, this is a massive multi-billion-dollar project. This is a very different project to building, a house with a couple of subcontractors. So the impacts of the pandemic and rampant inflation left to us by the Morrison government, that is something, as I previously announced, we're looking at and monitoring and assessing in terms of its impact right across a project that has thousands of subcontractors. So we're working our way through that process. When we have something to share with people, we certainly will.
And have you been given any advice to date that the $5.4 billion the state is chipping in is going to increase?
Look, at this stage, there's no formal advice to say that that's changed, but we are aware that there's pressure on this project, like there's pressure on every other construction project right across this country. We're seeing rampant inflation left by the Morrison government that spent like a drunken sailor, and we're now seeing the economy overheating because they mismanaged the economy. That's the reality, not just in Queensland, every other state. So we've seen the impact on steel, on concrete, on cement, on labour. As a result of that, we're doing the hard yards and the work and monitoring that situation, and that's the appropriate thing to do.
When will the analysis be done?
When it's completed.
Do you have any time frame?
I don't have a time frame, but it is a thorough piece of work, so I don't expect something to be available until next year.
And just on learner licences, the Premier suggested last week that you and your department are going to look at that. What type of work will you be doing, and how long will that take?
Yeah, look, we're looking at that matter in terms of the cost and also the structure of it, so we're happy to look at that. We've always said if there's you know, if there's a good idea, we're happy to have a look at it and see what can be done, and that's what we're doing.
Would there be significant savings for loaner drivers in the future?
Oh, well, that's something we'd be looking at, absolutely. Yeah, look, we want to see people with the cost of living impact of the inflation that we've inherited. We want to help people through that. That's why we've got the $175 power rebate, for instance, because we kept our assets in public hands. Wherever we can help the community during this cost of living squeeze, it's the worst it's been in a decade, there's no doubt about that. That's exactly what we're doing.
Thank you.
All good? Well, thanks so much, everybody. I think, are we doing some footage over here with the beer taps? I think they're set up with...